Okay. Uh, do you guys remember the London setup opening that we saw? Some of the setups that we saw. Kedar, you were not there. Okay. So we saw some opening setups. We'll see some more today. Then we'll see some middle game ideas. Okay. So Kedar, I will quickly go through those five setups which we saw. After that, we'll get into the new ones. Okay. Firstly, we saw the critical line in London starts with white playing d4, then black plays d5, and we start with bishop f4. Okay. We analyze why in some lines bishop f4 is a better move if you are planning to play the London system as compared to knight f3. Okay. Then if black continues with knight to f6, the standard continuation will be for white on to e3, and black plays, let's say black plays c5, we'll play c3, right? So we get this triangular pawn formation. Okay. So this is a standard pawn formation in London. Okay. Now let's say black continues with knight to c6, knight b to d2. Okay. So that after queen to b6, we'll play queen b3, offering to trade the queens. If black trades the queen, then white will have a semi-open file for the queen. Okay. How will black continue? C4. They'll play c4. What will white do? Queen c2. Here, bishop f5 does not work because the rook is not getting trapped. If they play bishop f5, you can simply capture the bishop, and after queen takes b2, you can come back b1 and defend the rook. Okay. So instead, black will try to continue with on to g6, preparing bishop f5. What will white do here? Here we'll play e4, right? It actually stops black's idea to play bishop f5, and we get the e4 break early. Okay. Normally black will not take, but if black takes on e4, you play knight takes on c4 with a tempo on the queen. Okay. You can collect the e4 pawn later. Okay. So this is the first setup where we saw how white can play the London system. Okay. Next setup that we saw was the main line. In main line starts similarly. Okay, with d4, d5, bishop f4, black plays knight to f6. We will play e3 and they play e6. This is the main line. Okay. So here we can develop knight to f3 because they have played e6. So we have the time to develop the knight. Okay. If they directly go for a c5 idea, then you will delay knight f3. Okay. So you play knight f3. Then let's say they play c5, c3. Always respond to c5 with c3. Then knight b6. You can play knight b to d2. They will challenge the dark square bishop with bishop to d6. Okay. So we saw one line. You can leave the bishop. It's not, I mean, you can take with the e pawn. We'll see one game where white does that, intentionally leaving the bishop. So you have more control on the e5 square. Okay. But the thematic idea is to pull the bishop back to g3 so that, yeah, you are expecting a trade to happen on g3. Okay. Leaving the bishop right there is also an idea. Okay. But instead of, okay, we'll go two moves back. Instead of bishop to d6, if they play bishop to e7, here you can either play h3, give a square because of knight h5, or you can directly play knight to e5, so that if knight h5, the queen is guarding the h5 square. Okay. That is if bishop to e7 is played instead of d6. But bishop d6, okay, so let's play bishop to g3, and if they castle, then you can develop the other bishop, complete development, bishop to d3. Okay, so this is the main line. In the main line, I will show you some games, right? So I'll show you what happens. So now, next move, white wants to castle. Okay, but depending on the player, you may or may not want to castle if you are allowing bishop takes g3. Okay, ruining your pawn structure in front of the king. So white players may play knight to e5 first, and then pawn to f4, and then castle. After knight e5, see, even before knight e5, if you just play bishop takes on d6, just trade the bishop. Bishop takes on d6, queen takes on d6, and then you go for that a4 setup. That is also a stonewall setup. But stonewall is just that pawn structure where you have an inverted triangle pawn structure. Okay. Then we saw the next setup, King's Indian. In King's Indian, black will go for a king side fiancé setup. So yeah, d4, knight f6. You will continue with your traditional bishop to f4. They play g6. We play e3, and they'll play bishop to g7. And after knight to f3, they'll just castle, and you are playing light square bishop to e2. In d3 is facing that pawn chain. Okay, so you will instead play pawn to c4 is good. Yes. See, if you look at King's Indian defense, okay, that is what your opponent wants you to do. Your opponent wants you to play d4, c4, maybe knight c3 and then e4. Okay. So that white will overextend. Then black will play a6, b5, c5, chip away at the center. Okay. They will move away the knight from f6 square, and they will play f7 to f5, right? And attack on e4. So that is their plan. So in London system, you are having certain pins. Okay. In other openings, you might have some other pins. But with the London system, the idea that you are having is you're not playing the variation that the black player is prepared for. If black is playing King's Indian defense, they are prepared for that. Usually they are prepared for the d4, c4 setup. Okay. But it's playable. D4, if you like, going for that expansion, if you like the space, and if you want to play that approach, you can do that. Okay. We'll look at that also. That we'll have to do in some variations, we have to play c4. Okay. Even if you are playing the London system, you may not be able to stick to it. I'll show you in the next one. Okay. So King's Indian, they'll go d6 instead of d5. Okay. Chandani, we are looking at what we saw in the last class and then we'll continue from there. So King's Indian usually D6 is played. Here white will continue with move. Firstly H3 because you don't want to trade that. I showed you that sequence, right? Yes, knight H5. See, if you miss that, then you have that idea which I told you. You go bishop G5 and come back. Okay. And when the knight goes to H5, because you have your light square bishop here, you may be able to play, move your knight and attack that knight on H5 after the pawn moves from the G6, right? So you play bishop G5 so that you will draw the bishop back in that way. Then you can move the F3 knight to E2 and attack that knight on H5, right? So that idea is there, but it's better to prevent that and just play H3. Okay. Black goes for C5, C3. They're playing pawn to B6. Okay. So we can castle or we can go knight B2 D2 in this position. Okay, they play bishop to B7. Then you play knight B2 D2. It's the same thing. Okay. Then they play knight B D7. Here, typically, you might expand or you have to prevent the expansion on the queen side with A4. Then we saw the Grunfeld. Grunfeld, the first few moves are similar. D4, knight F6, bishop F4, G6, E3, bishop G7, knight F3, castles, bishop E2, D5. D6 was played in King's Indian. Here you have D5. Okay. So we castle because here we still have the D5 square for the bishop. Okay. The castle, they play C5, C3, then after knight to C6. Yes, now it's correct. Okay, so they continue queen B6. We'll play queen B3, C4. Here you will play queen A3 because that diagonal is no longer occupied by the dark square bishop. So you have this move. Here queen C2 will be met with bishop F5 straight away and you have a pawn on G6. Okay, queen A3, you can prepare pawn B2, B3. Okay, Grunfeld. Then the last setup that we saw was Queen's India. B6. Correct. They'll play B6 and bishop to B7. So D4, knight F6, bishop F4. They start with E6. So far, they have not revealed what they are going to play. They could play the main line also. Okay. So you continue pawn to E3. Now B6. Queen's India defense. Okay. So you continue with knight to F3. They play bishop to B7. After bishop to D3, they develop the bishop to E7. Now we'll play H3. The moment they develop the dark square bishop and they indicate whether they are going to D6 or they are going to E7. E5 is the moment you go to E5, they will play pawn to D6. Then the pawn is active. G pawn is active. No, they can castle and they can do that. But the point is, no, like P5, they could take the pawn, and if they castle, you can then play H2. No, no. So they will not castle at that in that move. So you are saying you can wait one more move instead of H3, you can play something else. Okay. What I am trying to tell you is the moment they let you know their intention with the dark square bishop, then you can find the home for your dark square bishop, whether it goes to G3 or H2. If they plan to play bishop to D6, okay, if they play pawn D5 and bishop D6, then your bishop will go to g3. Okay, but if they don't do that, if they play bishop to e7, then you know that you have to pull your bishop back to h2. Okay, so the moment they make that move, you can then prepare for the home for your bishop. Okay, if you want, you can wait and play it in the next move, but that is the idea. Okay, h3 castles, c5, c3. Okay, they play d6. They don't want to play d5 because they don't want to close the diagonal. Of the bishop. Yeah, for the light square bishop. So you continue with right bishop. Right bishop, then bishop. Or is the intention to be six? Then I think. Yeah, so they might want to see if you clarify the position. Okay, now think about the knight going to d7. Okay, from d7, the knight will guard the c5 square. So if you don't clarify the position, they might be looking to go to d7 so that in future, if you play pawn takes on c5, they can capture that with a knight. Knight takes on c5. So the knight is eyeing the c5 square also. So it doesn't want to commit too soon. Okay, knight c6 is possible, but just keeping the options open. Okay, so they play knight b2 d7. Okay, so this is the Queen's Indian setup. Here, typically, with white, you will want to go for queen e2. Queen e2, you can plan queen c2 also, but with queen c2, the risk is black will play rook c8 and open the c5. Or take c7. Yeah. So queen e2 is better because you can plan e4, timely e4. Okay. Is the right. Yeah. Fine. So these were the setups that we saw. Okay. Now we'll look at some new setups. The London system against the Dutch. Okay. D4, F5. When black plays Dutch, what do you think is their idea? Their idea is to control the e4 square. Control the e4. But pushing your come together. Yes. So they are looking for a quick expansion on the king side. Oftentimes, they may not stop with castling. They might actually want to play g5, h5, and if you allow, if you allow, yeah, if you are castling king side, they want a quick king side attack. Another point is they want to develop the king side knight after pushing the f1. Okay, but they have many setups. Okay, so now let's say you play bishop to f4. This is our normal opening. They'll play knight to f6. This is the most flexible continuation for black. So far, they have not committed the pawns. Okay. White plays e3. So here, black has to like g6. Black has to basically commit to one pawn structure or the other, some setup. Okay, within Dutch. So they can go for pawn to g6. This is the Leningrad setup. Okay, or they can go for the classical setup. The classical setup is to just play e6. Okay, they can go for the stonewall setup. After e6, they continue on to play d5. Okay, in classical setup, they might just play e6 and then d6. Okay, or they could go for a setup not involving anything on this side. They can just go for a setup involving on b6 to b7. Okay, so there are these different options. So firstly, let's see if they go for the Leningrad with g6. So their idea is relatively straightforward. They want to play bishop to g7. Maybe they will castle on the king side. Okay. So here you can continue in the normal approach that you do for London. But nowadays the recommended move is h4, h5. Okay. The recent games that are being played in this line, you see white going for an immediate attack because they have given you a hook with the pawn on g6. You can go for h4, h5, try to trade on the king side and try to go for a quick attack. Okay, so now what happens if they just continue with their plan? Let's say they play bishop to g7. What does white want? We can go to we can go for h5 straight away. Okay. Okay, so you are willing to give up the exchange. If knight takes on h5, rook takes on h5, the point is after pawn takes, queen takes h5 check. Now it's very uncomfortable for black. Okay, the king will move. Next move, you can capture the pawn on f5 also. After you capture the pawn on f5, that will also come with a check. You give a look for knight and two pawns. The material is equal. And black king. Knight and two pawns for the rook, and the black king is exposed. The black king is exposed, lost the rights to castle, and the attack has not stopped. Right? You capture the f5 pawn with a check. So this is why this is actually a winning advantage for white. So the moment they don't realize why you have played pawn to h4 in this position, you can punish them with pawn to h5. Okay, so bishop g7 is not an option. H5. They can play h5 to stop us from playing h5. Okay, they have tried h6 in this position. Okay, this is also not great. The same thing works. Now, if you play h5, they don't want to capture. They just want to push the g pawn and kick your bishop, right? They just want to play pawn to g5. Oh, and then they get a big expansion. h5, g5, you have to move your bishop back and they get a space advantage. Okay, so that is why they have played h6. Okay, so here we move away from our traditional idea of playing pawn c to c3. Instead, we play knight to c3. Okay, because when black is playing this Leningrad Dutch, the setup that we have with the London system, okay, is actually advantageous for us. Okay, so we want to exploit it very soon. Okay, so black, let's say black continues with pawn to d6. Okay, here you don't have a choice. Here you just have to continue with the game. Okay, but if they don't do that, if they play bishop to g7 in this position, knight to b5, yes, knight to b5 is an idea. They will just play knight to this a3 and knight to a6, and they'll have to wait. That is an inferior position for them, true. But they can play pawn to d6, block your bishop out. Okay. Here you go queen f3. Because black has shown their intention to castle on the king side. Okay. So here you are going queen to f3. And if they castle now, White is ready, right? White is ready with White is ready with a welcome party for the black king. Okay, so simply white can play queen to g3, and this is a double attack. G6 pawn and c7. Okay, so when black plays the Leningrad Dutch, they can't go for their regular setup with bishop g7 idea. They have to play carefully because we have very aggressive idea with h4. Okay, so fine. Let's say they don't go for the Leningrad setup. But also better. Like, what if white is for the position plus white plays h4? See, the best move is actually in the previous move. After you play the London setup, they should not go for this Leningrad setup. If they really want to play Dutch, they should go for a mainline classical Dutch. Okay. Yes, against the London. So after playing, after committing this pawn structure, then you cannot stop white from going for the h4 idea. So they shouldn't give that hook, right? Okay. Let's say they go for e6. They may go for a stone wall or they may go for a classic mainline Dutch with pawn to e6, depending on what do they do with the d pawn. Okay, with e6 you have to continue normally. We play knight to f3. Now they will have to reveal their plan. Okay. They play pawn to d6. This is the mainline Dutch. Okay, so here we'll try to develop with our usual plan knight b to d2. Okay, and pawn to c3 and all that. But if they don't do that, if they go for the stone wall, with the stone wall formation, what is the major weakness for black? The e5 square. That is a long-term weakness. Okay. So immediately you can go for pawn to c4. Okay. So only in the Dutch you see your usual setup with the London system is getting changed a little bit. Okay. Where you are not playing pawn c to c3 and you are playing c4 or you are playing the knight to c3. Okay. So against the stone wall Dutch, the point of c4 is you straight away want to undermine the center so that they don't have a stronghold on e4. Okay. So you play c4. Now they'll play c6. Then you can play knight to c. Okay, so this is a better position for white because white has managed to develop the knight directly to c3 and they have more space on the queen side. Okay, and there is a permanent weakness in the middle of the board in the e5 square. Okay, let's say they continue bishop to e7. We play bishop to d3, the castle. Here we can go for the queen c2 idea. Earlier, when they played c5 and we played c3, okay, in that position they had the option of opening the c5. Right? Yes. But here we have the option of opening the c file. So we are in control. So we can play queen c. They come to e4. The whole point of the Stonewall Dutch, they want to put the knight on e4.
Just bring on knight and knight f3.
Yes. But here we go for g4. Okay. Trying to undermine black's center from both the sides. So you remember this stone wall triangle? You're trying to chip away at the stone wall from both the sides. You're playing c4 as well as g4. Okay. Now black's position is somewhat difficult to hold.
But like c4 is very counting. Like you have
Yes.
count.
Yes. Yes. Oftentimes white doesn't want to castle on the king side. White is going for an attack on the king side. Okay. The king might remain in the center itself for some time. Okay. If they play f takes on g4, then
Just take the come back with the
yeah, you can actually go knight e5, where the knight is actually threatening to capture back, and you're also planning to capture the e4 knight. The e4 knight is not adequately defended now, so they have to do something.
but they won't take the pawn, remember that. They won't take the pawn. They all play
So,
take g4. They try to hold the
they will try to hold the pawn center. True. Okay. But if this happens, you have knight e5. Okay. Okay. So fine.
knight.
So instead, if they don't take the pawn, they can play something like queen to a5, so that you are not able to freely trade on e4. Okay. Pinning the c3 knights. This is better than taking the pawn on g4. The other option will be for them to play knight to a6. Okay. They want to try and fork your queen and bishop, so you can play the move pawn to a3 and stop off.
Oh,
Okay, so this might be more playable than taking the pawn on g4. But our intention is not to castle kingside. We want to play h4, bring the other rook and attack. Okay. Now we go all the way back, and instead of the classical setup, if they go for this b6 setup,
7. Consider the 17. 6, 7, 6.
no, I meant the b6 setup
Not even 6 setup here.
within Dutch
No,
overall.
whole,
So we saw five setups before.
yeah,
Now in today we are seeing in Dutch, this is the fourth setup that we are seeing.
mindset.
Yeah, this is like the ninth. Okay, with pawn to b6, what is black's idea?
We should be
They want to again control the e4 square. Okay, instead of the stone wall formation, they are going for this formation where they're not committing the d pawn yet. Instead, they are trying to control e4 using their light square bishop. Okay, so we go bishop e2. Okay, and after they play bishop b7, we go castles.
we play we should be doing because of the F5 key. So we should be talking about
To some extent, yes. Okay, but here what we are trying to do is we want to have the queen some freedom to move away from the defense of the f3 knights. Okay.
Okay, so because
Yeah.
they can.
Yes. Black will be looking forward to take there on f3. Okay. So we want the freedom for the queen. So let's say they play bishop to e7. Here you play pawn to c4 instead of the c3 idea. Okay. Trying to indirectly stop the control on e4. Okay. So after they castle, here there is a very interesting continuation. Okay. Normally we'll play knight to c3 or knight b d2 and continue. But in this position, the idea is knight f to d2. Okay. The idea is twofold. One is you are avoiding that knight h5 trade.
Okay.
Okay. The other idea is you are controlling e4 and you have the option of playing f3 e4.
So you need to prepare it.
Yeah, you could play f3 e4, or if black doesn't allow, you could play bishop f3 and trade off that strong bishop that they have towards your king. Okay, so the idea is multiple.
Okay, bishop is long.
It's blocked.
The great.
Yeah. Yes. So this is more like a strategic maneuver that you are doing with your knights. Okay. So these are the Dutch setups. Okay. So now there are a couple of more setups. Okay. Before we go to them, let's look at one game. Okay. And then we'll come back to the remaining setups and we'll look at other games. Okay. This is one of the most famous games in London system. Gata Kamsky is white and Sam Shankland is black. Okay, and some of you might have come across this game before. If you have come across the game, then when I ask you for the right now, if you already know that, don't say. But if you are freshly finding the move, then tell me the move. Okay. So the game starts normally. Pawn to d4, play knight f6, bishop f4, e6, pawn to e3, and they played c5. Okay, so far everything is normal. White responds with c3. Okay, they play knight to c6. We are going knight f3. Now they play pawn to d5, going for the main line. Okay, we continue knight b d2. Here they play bishop to d6. In this game, bishop g3 was played. Okay, so far all these moves are same as what we saw. Black castles, white plays bishop to d3. Now black plays the move queen to e7. With queen to e7, the idea is to go for the e5 break. Similar to how you played queen e2 for an e4 break, right? So they are playing queen e7. They are going for an e5 break.
And to stop that, most time over and white left in ID4.
White will play knight to e5. Whenever the e5 pawn push cannot be stopped, white will put a knight there and forcefully stop it. Okay. Here the game continued with knight to d7. Knight to d7. And black wants to play pawn to f6 and chase that knight. So this is one of the critical positions in this game. It seems like black will be successful in chasing that knight away. We may not be able to hold that knight there. Even if we play f4, they'll play f6 and chase that knight. But there is something else that white plans to do here. Any ideas? So here white continues with this move. Knight takes on d7. Okay. Here white has a lot of flexibility. I'll come to that. Knight takes on d7. Yes. How will black recapture?
With the bishop. So that they still have the one there.
Correct. Bishop takes on d7 is played in the game. Okay. But in this position, black was supposed to play queen takes instead of bishop takes for the following idea. Okay. We'll come to that. What happens if queen takes? White continues with bishop takes on d6. Queen takes d6. Then white plays d takes on c5. Black will play queen takes on c5. So it seems as if white has traded all its beautiful pieces. Okay. The bishop, the dark square bishop on g3, the knight on e5. Okay. Its central pawn. It seems white has traded all these things and the trade seems advantageous for black. Okay. But why did white do all these things? White wanted to play the move. No, there is something else. Bishop takes on h7. Check. White wanted to play this. Okay. Point is, after king takes, queen h5 check. And now the move.
G.
King g8. How will white continue? If only the knight was on f3, then the knight could have gone to g5. The game would have been over. Here, white can play the move knight to e4. See how that pawn is played. So the knight manages to go to g5 with a tempo. Black is forced to move the queen. Okay. In the game, queen to c4 was played. Then knight to g5.
And you can't stop it.
One point about why queen c4 was played was because black's intention is to play queen d3, cover the mate like this.
Okay.
If rook d8, queen will just go to g6 and trade. But here white has the move. Pawn to e4, cutting off the diagonal. Okay, h7 is no longer defended. So black has to make a square for the king and they'll move the rook. Okay, so they can play something like rook f2 d8 and the attack continues. Okay, so they realize that they didn't play the move queen to d3. Okay, they directly played the move rook f2 d8. Okay, so here the attack is very strong. White did play queen takes f7 check, king h8. It's not a forcing mate yet. Okay, king h8, queen h5 check, king g8. Now white has a very strong move, rook to d1. Okay, so in the game they played pawn to e5, trying to cover the d4 square so that the rook is unable to infiltrate. Okay, white gave another check, queen f7 check. And if white wants, next move they can capture the central pawn and continue. But white goes for something even better. Okay, so after king h8, white played the move pawn to e4.
So many things.
Yeah, pawn takes, the bishop is hanging. Pawn to e4.
You have to win the queen. No, you can't push it with the queen's hand.
Yes, the queen is hanging. So it's very difficult for black to defend. So in this position, black decided to Play knight to e7. Give back the piece. Okay. But the idea of knight to e7 is it's protecting the,
The pawn.
yes, it's protecting the d5 pawn. Okay. But white can simply capture the knight.
What else? No. Why is
Yeah. White is threatening too many things. Okay. Black played bishop b5. What should white do?
minus or castle?
Black is threatening mate. Okay.
Rook e2. E2.
Rook to d2. Just defending mate. Now black tried queen takes a2. Here white simply played queen f7. After queen a1 check, you will just block with the rook. Queen takes on, b2 was cleared. Now mate is not stoppable. Okay. Now white can go for the kill. Okay. So they start with queen h5 check. King moves away. g8, queen h7 check. Only move, queen h8.
Check.
No, you have to try and bring the pieces into the game. Okay. King goes to e7, only move. Queen takes g7 check. Now king cannot go back. Will be mate. So king goes to d6, only move. Okay. White will play. Rook takes on d5 check. Okay. Now another rook is into the attack. Black can no longer hold. Okay. Then a couple of moves black designed. So they played king to c6. Yeah, yeah. And after queen f6 check, black resigned. What will happen if black continue? Black played king c7 and white will play you can do, but you can bring one more attacker, knight e6 check. Then after king b6, you can knight takes knight takes d8 with a discovered check. Okay, so there is nothing much to do. But you should always be watchful that even in this position, if you don't have a check, okay, black is threatening to mate. Black is always threatening mate in one. Okay, but white can easily stop with queen f3. Okay, so the attack would have continued. So black resigned well before that. After queen f6 check, black resigned. Okay. So since then, this has become one of the thematic sacrifices on h7. with the idea that the queen will be on c5 square. If the queen is on c5 square, the knight is able to come to g5 square with a tempo. The knight is able to, usually the knight comes via f3, but here the knight can come via e4. But I told you white has some flexibility, right? You go all the way back. If instead of bishop takes, they play queen takes d7, this is not losing. What is the difference here?
The queen is protecting the or
The main difference is the bishop is still on c8, okay, whereas on d7 the bishop was not defended. The bishop would have been hanging after the trades, okay. Now if bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and d takes on c5, queen takes on c5, okay. If you go for the same idea, bishop takes h7 check, king takes queen h5, knight to e4. Here the difference is black has the move on to g6, okay. Still not better, but this is not lost for black. The point is, if you take the queen on c5, black will capture the queen on h5. But now queen takes c5 does not come with a threat. The bishop is not there on d7, right? In the original game, if you go all the way back, if they played bishop takes on d7, after the same sequence, bishop takes d6, queen takes, pawn takes, queen takes, bishop takes on h7, king takes, queen h5, king g8, knight e4. Now if they play g6, the difference is you can simply capture the queen on c5. They will capture your queen, but you have a free bishop over there. Okay. It comes with a tempo on the rook. The rook will also have to move. The rook moves, but knight f6 and one more pawn will be lost. So at the end of all the exchanges, white regains the piece and gets two extra pawns, and that to the h pawn, protected pass pawn. Very difficult to stop that h pawn, right? So that was not possible. But instead of bishop takes, if they did, if they played queen takes, okay. Here, white has the option to try and force a draw, okay. After bishop takes, queen takes, okay. You can go for the same line. Pawn takes on c5, queen takes on c5, bishop takes h7 check, king takes, queen h5 check, king moves away, knight to e4, okay. If they play pawn to g6, here you can simply move the queen to g5. And if you want, you can force a draw. After queen comes back to e7, hoping to trade, you can just play knight f6 check. And the king cannot escape from the checks. King g7, knight h5, check. The king has to stop the queen from coming into h6, right? which means I can again go back to f6 and give a check. King g7, knight h6. Okay, so you can repeat and force a draw if that is what white wants to. Okay, so that option is there.
But also this problem would have taken the pawn and then taken the queen with checking.
Yeah, but in that position, you have sacrificed the bishop.
Oh,
So you don't want to trade the queens, then there will be no attack. White is down a piece, right? So if white cannot find a way to continue the attack, then they will have to force pawn, right? There was another game in this variation itself. If you go back, thereafter, queen takes on d7. You know that queen takes on d7 is the right move, right? When you're playing white. And if you don't want to force the draw, then you should not go for that sacrifice, right? Then you can simply play bishop takes d6, so that after queen takes d6, you can castle and you don't have to
enter the forcing.
enter a forcing draw. Okay, but you don't have to always take that bishop on d6. Okay, sometimes players they don't mind if the black player decides to take the pawn on, take the bishop on g3 and ruin the pawn structure. Okay,
Oh yeah, because of everything's really an opening like the locals.
f takes is an option. Yes, f takes is an option, but you have to calculate f takes because many times your e3 pawn will become too weak after f takes.
But it changes opens up your village, right?
It opens up, but even in this position, h takes is still better than f takes because the weakness on e3 is too much. But it's also a matter of taste. Okay, players might go for that line. Okay, now let's say black continues something like pawn to b6. Okay, you can continue if you want. You can take the bishop. This was played in a game, so after queen takes. Here, after queen takes, the idea is to play pawn to f4, going for the stonewall setup. This was played by Grischuk in one of his games.
Bishop.
Yeah, trading the bishop on d6 and then going for pawn to f4. Because you don't have a knight that can go to e5. The f3 knight is gone. Okay. So you want to bring the other knight from, yeah, knight from d2 to f3. You want to bring it, but you don't want to put that knight blocking the f pawn on f3. Okay. So you play f4 first. Okay. There was another game where the problem which you said happened. Okay. Black played bishop takes on g3 after castling. Here white played h takes on g3 for the reasons I was talking about, the weakness on e3. Okay. So now black will try to exploit your weakness on the h5. They'll try to bring the queen, queen e7. They are trying to play h7 to h5, h4, and so on. Okay. But here again, white can play pawn to f4. Pawn to f4 is an interesting idea here. Okay. You can bring the queen to g4. That is one. You can bring the king to f2 and bring the rooks to the h5. This is also equal but slightly better forward. Okay, so these are some lines that are different from the game, which is very well playable also. Okay, fine. Uh, so tomorrow we'll look at a couple of other setups. We'll look at some other games. Okay, fine. That's all for today.